Okay, greetings and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I'm Sovereign Sire, a writer, a comedian, and a dilettante.
And I'm Ella Darling, a former librarian, a VR pioneer, an adult film performer, and a debutante. Or at least I probably would have been one decades ago.
A dirty debutante.
A dirty debutante.
For those that don't know, a very popular gentleman's special interest film series.
Gentleman's special interest film series, emphasizing.
We here at Ill Repute support women's rights.
But more importantly, we support women's wrongs. Now, Savi, which woman's wrongs are we righting today?
We are talking about the one and only VC Andrews, bitch. Subtitle, If You Know, You Know.
If you know, really should be her epitaph.
It really should. Like that. I hope that that's what is on her tombstone is if you know, but not even if you know, you know.
No, just like IFYKYK.
Yeah.
With maybe a few like tea emojis and an upside down smiley face.
Exactly.
Delivering. This woman delivers through death.
Yeah.
Cleo Virginia Andrews was born June 6th, 1923 in Portsmouth, Virginia. She was the second child of William Henry Andrews and Lillian Lilnora Parker. They were married in 1920, the same year that women were given the right to vote in federal elections. Friends and family said that Lillian was the head of the household, being described as determined and controlling, and that ultimately the family of 5 was really a family of 2, Lillian and her daughter, Virginia. While William enlisted in the Navy, Lillian worked as a telephone operator, also known as a hello girl. Telephone operators were women who physically connected phone calls back in the day. So a person would ring the operator, tell her, and it was pretty much always a her, who they were trying to connect to, and she would connect the call.
Which, this is a side note, is I've looked at our stats, and 90% of our audience is women between the ages of 18 and 30. So,
oh my God, welcome queens. Hello, girl. I'd like to say hello, girl, to all of you.
So I feel like it is incumbent upon us to explain the ancient technology.
No, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
I was very charmed that the children find what we have to say interesting. I was very flattered to know that
the children are interested.
That I am shaping young minds. In 1927, her father took the family to Rochester, New York, where he got a job working at Bausch & Lomb, the optical company. She was a gifted artist from a young age, showing so much talent that at the age of 7, she was enrolled in an art class at the local community college. And at this time, she got to meet the architect, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wow, that's insane. From The Woman Beyond the Attic by Andrew Neiderman. Quote, much later in life, when she was talking about her art experiences, Virginia related her vivid memory of Wright pausing at her second grade desk, standing behind her, looking over her shoulder and asking, "Why did you draw a round house with all glass?" She recalled her teacher standing by with a small smile of pride and curiosity. From what Virginia described, one of the world's most famous architects didn't even intimidate her 7-year-old self, which, I mean, she's 7, of course not. She doesn't know what an architect is.
Yeah.
To her, the answer was plain and simple. "Well, it's my mother," she replied. "She always complains that she never seems to have enough windows."
What if at 7 years old, she had turned to him and been like, "I see a vision in the future. Your family is going to be destroyed in a fire started by a servant that loses his mind. All hope is lost. Don't cheat on your wife. Whatever you do, It will set into motion a series of events you can never escape from.
Is that the story of Frank, right?
Oh, yeah. It's very tragic. Very tragic. Man. He left his wife for another woman, and then him and that woman kind of created their own little place. I think it's called Falling Water was the name of the place. And very, very tragically, there was a servant that kind of lost his mind. And
It's so tragic to see the fallout of infidelity.
It just would have been so fitting if she had been able to predict because what happened to him really kind of very much mirrors what becomes the fate of many of the characters in her books. So, just intrigue and betrayal and death, all of the exciting, very gothic, very, very gothic.
Yeah.
In 1930, fleeing from the Great Depression, Virginia's family moved back to Portsmouth. Virginia skipped the 3rd grade, was promoted from 4th grade to the 6th grade. She was very clearly gifted. She was only 13 when she started high school. She did attempt to write an autobiography when she was older, but said that she tore it up because it just made her so depressed. So the book I read didn't really get into... It got a little into family dynamics. There's not a lot about her, first of all. What did come out about her was, the media that was available in sort of the early 80s to the mid 80s. So a lot of puff pieces, stuff like that. There were a few interviews, but as we'll see later, she kind of had a tendency to be very evasive in interviews. And the author of this book, Andrew Neiderman, who big shout out because this episode relies very heavily on his book, which came out in 2018. But he was her ghostwriter after she passed away. And he was close with her family and was able to get these interviews and access to people we're going to be hearing from in this episode. All of that came from his really hard work and research. So I want to make sure that he's getting that shout out. There's still stuff that he couldn't necessarily surface, So what exactly the dynamics were like when she was a little kid and all of that, is a lot of it is kind of inferential, which is they did live through the Great Depression. They were not super well off. She did claim to be kind of inspired by the things that she saw and heard about what other families were going through at that time. So there's an insinuation that there was probably some family dynamics, the insinuation that mom was kind of very controlling and in charge of everything. But at the same time, it seems that this was a family. My impression after reading the book is that this was a family that was incredibly close in terms of supporting each other. She's always surrounded by nieces and nephews, living nearby brothers to make sure that the family network stayed together. So, whatever happened in her childhood, the family unit was very strong.
From the book, quote, when her niece asked her what the source was for her stories, she admitted to being influenced by the terrible newspaper stories about other children. She said, it makes you think about the why, and from that, characters develop and stories begin to form.
The Great Depression impacted everyone in American society. Even when one's family was able to escape abject poverty, the signs of it and the desperation and rupture it caused would still be seen by anyone walking down the street. One of the most visible signs of children's mistreatment during the Great Depression was the prevalence of child labor, which is probably what she was talking about. With families struggling to make ends meet, children were often forced to work in factories, mines, and fields to supplement family income. Many children endured long work hours, dangerous working conditions, and meager wages, sacrificing their education and childhoods in the process. So I imagine that there were probably a lot of newspaper stories about, working conditions, labor conditions for children.
When did child labor laws come into play?
I think they were there. They came in during the Industrial Revolution, sort of later. The big thing that was kind of the product of the Great Depression was probably child abuse laws. Labor laws were a constant kind of problem from the beginning of factory work. And so it was kind of an ongoing issue.
That makes sense. I'm just looking at the Fair Labor Standards Act, established in 1938, was the most comprehensive federal law that restricts child labor in the United States. Now,
restricts, not outlaws, restricts.
Restricts. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's kind of a lot of what was in news stories was, there would be a lot of scandal around that, kids getting injured, dying. The big thing with little kids was maiming, because they have small limbs and fingers and things.
Right. One example is a 16-year-old died after getting caught in a poultry processing machine. That was last year, though. Just for clarity, that was last year. A 16-year-old last year on a Mississippi farm lost their life while processing chickens. Just to emphasize that this is not a weird facet of our past. This is literally young people are still doing this today.
Yeah.
The sale of one's children was not uncommon, either in the hopes they would bring in money or simply to be rid of them as dependents. The Great Depression hit families the hardest. Famous news cases that happened during Virginia's childhood during the Depression would have been the famous photo of a woman offering her 4 children for sale and Georgia Tann. Now, the 4 children for sale photograph is a poignant image that captured the desperation and hardship faced by many families during the Great Depression in the United States. The iconic photograph was taken by the Farm Security Administration, the FSA, a government agency tasked with documenting and addressing rural poverty.
The image depicts a destitute mother sitting with her 4 young children on a crowded city street. The children, ranging in age from a baby to a young girl, stand next to their mother with signs that read, "4 children for sale, inquire within." Is a powerful representation of the extreme poverty and desperation faced by many families during the Great Depression. It highlights the harsh realities of economic hardship and the lengths to which families were forced to go in order to survive.
The photograph garnered widespread attention when it was published in newspapers and magazines, drawing public awareness to the plight of the poor and contributing to the efforts to address the social and economic challenges of the time. It remains one of the most iconic images of the Great Depression era.
So now Georgia Tann was a notorious American child trafficker. She operated primarily in the first half of the 20th century, and she was the executive director of a place called the Tennessee Children's Home Society, which was an adoption agency based in Memphis, Tennessee. And she ran that agency from the 20s to her death in 1950. This place was pretty notorious for basically being Black market adoptions. Also, like the death of children in the home, like after her death, like the kinds of macabre discoveries out back. Not great.
Under the guise of helping orphaned and abandoned children, Tann engaged in a range of unethical and illegal activities. She would often separate children from their birth families through coercion, deception, or outright theft, then place them up for adoption with wealthy families, sometimes even selling them for a profit. Tann's actions resulted in the forced separation of countless children from their biological parents, and many of these children were placed in abusive or neglectful homes, which, once again, times don't always change, do they?
No. So while it wasn't found out till the 50s, like there were rumblings about this before she died. Like there were legal attempts to expose her, and she was able to quash them. So like this still would have been kind of in the zeitgeist, and especially for someone like Virginia who spent a lot of time reading.
These stories would have certainly been in Virginia's ear as a child and young teenager. The impact of the Great Depression and the ends to which those suffering from poverty would be put through to survive, and how they would have treated their own children under such desperate circumstances. She certainly would have learned the value of money and what people do in order to have it and to protect it. Like, Jesus Christ. That's a pretty harsh lesson, pretty quick.
This to me is an interesting little part in the book. Virginia was also very perceptive about other types of abuse that wouldn't have made it to the front pages, which she alluded to in an interview years later. So again, this is an excerpt from The Woman Beyond the Attic. They're quoting her from the Virginian Pilot, which would be the local paper. Virginia said, "I had a hard time when I was a teenager. I think all teenagers do. In those days, nobody told you about anything. You were in the dark about sex. I was a pretty girl. It wasn't so much that friends of my brothers were interested in me, their fathers were interested in me." That's her emphasis. "I couldn't talk about it. I wanted honesty and no one gave it to me. Instead, I was handed fairy tales. So I went to the library and I got out a book."
Yes.
And yeah, so to that, what struck me about that was that she was perceptive to things like these darker elements of sexuality, the verboten, at that time were not talked about and were not talked about until the 70s. But it was something that she, as a teenager, became aware that like, oh, there's a second layer that we don't talk about that just doesn't
Was she
get talked
abused sexually
about.
When she was a child by men in her life?
By all accounts, no. And that kind of, the surety of that really is down to her immobility and her mom just sort of on her like a hawk. Like it would have been that would have been quite difficult.
What I'm seeing.
And honestly, if it had, I think she probably would have talked about it. To be honest, I think there we can even start to see the seeds of what kind of a writer she was going to be. That she was someone that was very perceptive about the things that are kept in the dark, and that was going to be something she was probably obsessed by throughout her life because it wasn't talked about and because it was being held back as some kind of a mystery. That's just from reading the book, the sense of her character that I got is, just an incredibly bright, perceptive person that was completely willing to wade into dark water and swim in it.
Yeah.
And be like, what if we went deeper?
Books and libraries were soon to become more than just a means of entertainment and education for Virginia. They would become a lifeline, her entire world, through a series of physical injuries and medical interventions that would seriously curtail her mobility and social life. Virginia was pretty, and she was bullied. She was intelligent and clearly talented. Unfortunately, around the age of 15, she started to undergo physical deterioration that would continue for the rest of her life and drastically change its trajectory. There's been a lot of confusion and misinformation about Virginia's disabilities, and much of that is down to her own resistance to lead with them. Now, I'm going to stop for a second because I have to, because we're talking about libraries, and just talk about how important your local library is. It is a safe space. It is a third space outside of work and home and school that people can be. It's one of the last vestiges of public space where you're welcome without spending money, without contributing to capitalism in any way. And it's a place of freedom of thought, freedom of ideas. Librarians have gone to jail to defend your intellectual freedom. You not. Librarians are punk rock. Support your library, go to your library, get a library card.
Libraries would become very relevant to Flowers in the Attic, which is her most famous book. We'll get into this later, but one of the unique things that happened with the publication of her first debut novel is that it immediately got banned in a lot of high schools and other places. And so when I went on TikTok and put out a video saying hey, does anyone care about VC Andrews? Would this be interesting to do? And that video is at 70,000 views and 5,000 likes and 2,000 responses going, yeah. And so many of them had stories of the only place that I could find the books was the library. I was a preteen or I was a teenager and I couldn't have them in my house. My parents said I couldn't read them. They were considered very taboo. So there were a lot of comments in there about that the place that they were able to even access the book was the library, which is ironic given kind of how much books and all of that stuff became, essential to her emotional survival.
Absolutely.
So this is again from Woman Beyond the Attic. Quote, she railed against the reporters and commentators who wanted to create, quote, some sort of paralyzed creature struggling to type out her fantasies, unquote. She saw herself being depicted as, quote, the humpback of the Church of Bestsellers, a creature dressed in beautiful clothes to distract the viewer from seeing the abnormalities, unquote. So, understandably, she felt invaded and discredited by public interest in her health and disability, who wouldn't. So when she finally did talk about it, she would troll reporters. She would exaggerate her illness or just make up stories as a kind of private gotcha, which is what has led us to where we are now, which is that we don't know a lot, which is the way she wanted it. Like, she didn't want narratives around her disability to overshadow her work. Like, unfortunately for her, it also kind of worked in reverse, which is because of the lack of information, it's allowed people to really fantasize about what was going on. She did have illness. It was real. She was immobile. She could stand. She could sit on her own, but she needed wheelchairs and crutches to do that without being in agonizing pain. And I think that is what has led to a lot of confusion. Is you will see later articles varying from she can't move to she's paralyzed to which are not true. So it's down to kind of misunderstanding exactly what was going on and her just being so annoyed that people kept asking, because what does that have to do with my writing?
And it's still a problem today. Right? But especially back then, they just didn't know how to be tactful about this kind of thing. And even the language used to describe people back then that, we use in the script because it's what was used at the time. Today is it's interesting how far we've come and yet still how far we have to go, because we still see people hiding their illnesses because they don't want it to be the central part of their persona as a public figure.
Takeaway is, no one wants to be your inspiration. That's actually a red flag. Because there's all these Reddits around malingering and all this other stuff, and we're definitely going to do an ill repute about malingering. But I would say, and a red flag doesn't mean stop, it just means ask more questions. I would say red flags, whether it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, disability, whatever, is if you're encountering someone that is wants to be inspirational, that's not generally kind of the profile when someone's been through a lot of times they really don't want to lead with they don't want to lead with it. They don't, because you're tired of it being kind of everything about you, right? It's so that in life can be kind of a little bit of a red flag. If someone is kind of really just constantly leading with their misery, generally people that are going through a lot of hardship and anguish, don't want that to be front and center of what you know about them. They actually kind of go through a great deal of trouble to try to minimize it, because they want to be seen as a whole person. Yeah.
An example of her disability overshadowing her work is a 1981 Washington Post article. Quote, I had a bout of growing bone which threw my body out of alignment, she says, but the doctors would not believe me when I said my hip hurt. They said, you walk too gracefully. You can't possibly hurt. You look too good. I found out that looking too good is a terrible way to go into a doctor's office. They don't take you seriously. They think women are vain anyway. She continues, when it finally became obvious that the bone spur had thrown my spine out of alignment, it led me into a bout with arthritis, which I needn't have had if they'd taken the bone spur off immediately. This went on for 4 years, starting when I was about 18. Then they began to correct the damage with operations. I had 4 major ones and have 1 more coming up. I can have corrective surgery, but I'm a little leery of doctors because they made mistakes with me. One doctor had a small stroke while he was operating. The saw slipped and he cut off the socket of my right hip. I wish I never articulated those words out of my only mouth that I possess, because it did not have a good mouthfeel saying them. And now I'm thinking about that process in my head. Did that happen? No. Okay. Okay, good.
No. So the author of the book, Andrew Neiderman, kind of had this special access to surviving family, had a close relationship with them because he was her ghostwriter. So he did the best he could in terms of gathering what people knew, right? And it was a close-knit family. Many took turns kind of as caregivers, even just occasionally. What is true is that when she was 15, she was like coming down a staircase and like twisted her hip somehow and was in excruciating pain. And it was pain that did not go away. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And there were doctor visits, like she said, not believed that her pain was real, all of those kinds of things. It gets to a point where she isn't able to walk well, and she's being called gimpy and limpy by teachers, by crossing guards, by fellow students, right? Like, so basically for 2 years, she's got a degenerative condition going on that is not even being looked at. It's being denied that it exists until it becomes undeniable. So by the time she's 17, it's undeniable that something is like seriously not right here, right? So it's like finally she gets in somewhere. So the first place they take her is Johns Hopkins, and they do a surgery. Finally, at this point, it does look like sort of bone spurs that have grown like on her hip or on her spine. That it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Right. And then she goes for like to another hospital for like another corrective surgery. They end up putting her in a full body cast. And when they take her out of the body cast, the condition's even worse because leaving her in the body cast had basically allowed the things to mend and bond where they
like
shouldn't.
Fusing together bones that shouldn't.
Fusing. Now, a later like in-law, so like nephew or niece that married someone that was a doctor, and I think was like a bone doctor. What do they call
An
that? Like orthopedic.
Orthopedist. I should know.
Osteopath is the one that doesn't believe in
an
medicine.
orthopedist. I just saw an orthopedist for like several months last year. I should know.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if he actually ever examined her or not, but he had said it was, I want to look it up to make sure I'm saying it right. Ankylosing spondylitis. It's a systematic rheumatic disease that affects the whole body. It's a chronic inflammatory disease that creates bone spurs, thinning discs, etc. in the spine and other places. So it is debilitating. It is chronic, obviously incredibly painful, and degenerative. So that is what it was. Now, her talking about someone cutting this hip socket, like that's fantasy. That's just like made up. And that was her trolling reporters. Like, oh, you want a miserable story? Like, let me give you this miserable story. Because it was less exciting than going, basically due to general malpractice and not being believed, it allowed the condition to just go unchecked until a point in which the damage that had been done was no longer treatable. So basically this happened around the time she was 15. It became clear there was a problem. It also became clear that her mom had some issues. Like her mom made up this story that what had happened was that Virginia had been pushed down the stairs by jealous classmates. And we can guess at like why that's the story that she felt more comfortable with. I think it probably had to do with the fact that she would rather it be something that was done to Virginia than perhaps like a congenital issue, which would have meant that it was like in some way maybe her fault. There was also an account in the book about like a cousin that came to visit, and Virginia was in a chair on the front porch, and the mom had her arranged in such a way on the porch that she was kind of hidden from the street by like a large tree, and there was some comment made about not wanting people to see her. So, like it's kind of, it's there's an undercurrent there, but there were no like direct quotes from Lillian in the book. So I don't think that she's someone that he was able to interview or talk to, or just didn't ever tell anyone directly kind of what her deal with it was. So it's left to conjecture, but it becomes clear throughout the thing that her and her mom had very much kind of a push-pull relationship, you know, where they loved each other very much, but there was also just the natural strain that happens when you're someone's like 24/7 caregiver. Right.
While she was in recovery, she met a young doctor and they hit it off. She told him that she wanted to one day be an author, and he gave her a story to write about. He told her that during his childhood, he and his siblings had spent 6 years hidden in an attic in a huge mansion to preserve the family wealth. This was told to several family members, but details beyond this snippet were never revealed by her. It isn't known how the children being hidden protected the family's wealth, or whether the children were mistreated during their internment. What is clear is that the story stayed with her, eventually becoming the premise for her most famous work, Flowers in the Attic, 40 years later.
A cousin, Pat, it's a female cousin who was about 17 years younger than Virginia, believes that her family, Pat's family, minus the incest element, were the inspiration for the children in Flowers in the Attic. So in Flowers in the Attic, there's an older brother, Chris, a younger sister, Kathy, and then there's 2 twins, Carrie and Corey. And in the book, Chris, when he becomes adult, becomes a doctor. So in Pat's family, her older brother became a doctor, and she had 2 younger siblings who were twins. And there's a lot of stories like that. Virginia was very inquisitive. She would just ask her nieces and nephews questions, her cousins questions about falling in love, about what it felt like to be in love, family dynamics. So she was a sponge. Like, she was just kind of taking in all this information. So I think that's totally plausible that she kind of mapped that dynamic between those siblings onto characters she was writing without the characters being those people.
Yeah, I think I think people have a tendency to really want to autobiographize, I suppose, authors and what they write, and really project the author onto characters, which I think it's a natural inclination, but I think it's a disservice to the art and the artist.
So while Flowers in the Attic was not published for another 40 years, she did claim to have written the first draft in one night, writing it out by hand, and then typing it out the next day. Now, there has been a whole lot made about what characters from her own family inspired the characters in the book that made her famous, specifically the villainous grandmother, Olivia, in the story. And a lot of people have surmised that it was based on her mother. The character of Olivia and the grandfather are both depicted as being very like hellfire, brimstone, kind of Old Testament religious, which would have been pretty common in the South. And her mother, Lillian, while she wasn't religious, Lillian's parents had been very, very religious, like fire and brimstone-y. And so I think Lillian still carried some of that with her, even though she sort of outwardly rejected it. But I dare say I would think that Olivia is probably based on how Lillian described her own mother, rather than Olivia being Virginia's mother. But, her mom did have a big concern with outward appearances and ruled the household like very strictly. So there's definitely elements of Lillian in the character of Olivia.
Right. What is most likely true is that Virginia was a good writer, and a good writer, first and foremost, is a good observer, collecting stories and characters throughout life to later be deployed in imaginary scenarios. Most likely, the inspiration for Flowers in the Attic was gathered together from a lifetime of observations and case studies. There are websites and forums where fans of her books try to map Virginia's real life onto that of her characters, which does a disservice to her writing. Writers imagine themselves into interesting scenarios. They might rely on their own memories of times when they were frightened or in love or driven to help to flesh out their characters. Writers imagine themselves into interesting scenarios. They might rely on their own memories of times when they were frightened or in love or driven to help flesh out their characters. But that hardly makes them autobiographical.
If anything, Virginia's time in the body cast would have given her plenty of inspiration for the experience of painful confinement. And things only got worse. So, like I said, the surgery, that second surgery that was supposed to make her better, which put her in a full body cast for a period of time, ended up making it worse. They take the body cast off. Things have melded and joined where they shouldn't. She's gone from being uncomfortable walking and whatnot to needing crutches and a wheelchair to get around. And this is happening when she's 17 years old, which is right at the time when other people her age were like going to dances and socials and like meeting their future partners, going off to college. It must have been brutal. Yeah.
Virginia's mother, Lillian, didn't take it well. She often tried to hide her daughter, being embarrassed by her condition. After the death of Virginia's father, when Virginia was an adult, Virginia and Lillian moved in with Virginia's cousin Pat for a brief time. From The Woman Beyond the Attic. A memory that stands out for her resulted from Lillian's insistence every night that Virginia, then an adult woman, eat everything on her plate. If Virginia did not, her mother would taunt her about not getting dessert. One night, Virginia didn't eat everything, and her mother refused to give her a cookie and sent her to bed with her bedroom door shut. Pat says she went in and asked Virginia how she could stand everything her mother dished out to her. Virginia replied, "I take myself away from it all. I imagine I'm a princess in a castle enjoying life." That's a coping mechanism for sure.
The thing Virginia was really good at was creating an environment for herself. So her house would always, so she was very good at painting and drawing. She's very good at sewing. She designed gowns for other people, for herself, sewed them herself. She was good at knitting, at embroidery, all of it, crafting, right? And that's what she spent a large part of her waking hours doing. And so she would make stuff for herself, stuff for her friends, stuff for just local people that were paying her. But she would create her rooms, would be hung with flowers and beautiful drapes and kaleidoscopes. Like one of her nieces talks about, like she would bring down these kaleidoscopes and let them play with the kaleidoscopes. So she's someone that very much spent her time as much as she could creating an environment around herself where everywhere she looked, she was looking at beautiful things. And she was always just making and doing
very
stuff
aesthetic.
If she wasn't reading.
She'd kill it on Etsy if she were around today.
Oh, probably. 100%. Yeah. Virginia's condition isolated her far beyond the way it would today. So in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, there was a great deal of stigma around people that used mobility devices, and public buildings and transport didn't have accommodations for people that used them.
Virginia mainly dealt with boredom and loneliness by reading voraciously and sketching and painting. She was a gifted artist from the age of 7, and her mother went out and hustled Virginia's artwork once she fell ill. Lillian had Virginia's paintings selling in all the shops in Portsmouth, giving her a modest career despite her invalid status. Like many people suffering from chronic illness, she also underwent endless medical procedures that did nothing but cause pain and exhaustion, and she was frequently prescribed medicines that made her health worse, like the full body cast. Given the family's financial situation, they couldn't afford a caregiver, so all of that work fell to Lillian, which gave them an incredibly close but also fraught relationship. Understandably.
Yeah. And that's it. Like, even to this day, if you talk to any woman suffering from any kind of chronic illness or autoimmune disorder, they will throw prescriptions at these people that have all kinds of weird side effects because they don't know what to do. Like, at the end of the day, the answer is they don't know, which can be incredibly demoralizing, as well as just physically exhausting and draining. I would also like to mention that medical malpractice is the third leading cause of death. So just be aware that, a lot of stuff they just don't know, and they don't know how to say that. So despite all of this, the family describes her as beautiful, outwardly happy, and affable during visits. So her younger cousin, Pat, is quoted as saying, "Virginia was always dressed and very well groomed for any guest who might arrive. She wore beautiful ensembles, complemented by nice rings, bracelets, and any other jewelry to help her escape to her castle. Her makeup was always jaw-dropping, exquisite. Her personality matched her personal beauty. She never whined or griped. Even though she struggled to walk with the aid of her crutches, there was never a whimper. She was the first warrior I met, and she has influenced me more than I will ever explain, and probably more than I really knew. She was an idol to me, unquote.
Man, being jaw-droppingly accomplished at doing makeup, being really good at makeup like that is something that I think a lot of people write off as being just vain. But makeup, nails, that is all an incredibly beautiful, ephemeral form of art that you do, you enjoy, and then it's dashed away like it was never there again. And it's like that sort of appreciation in temporary aesthetics is seen in a lot of very well-respected art, but because it's a female pursuit, it's denigrated as vanity. And I love that she didn't give
I love that for her, it was super important. And that it helps you understand how she wanted to be perceived and why she hated people bringing up her disability. It's like she created this whole world to live in that was surrounded by beautiful things. And she spent her time and her energy into like creating beautiful things. And she cared about her presentation. Like it lets you know, she wanted you to see her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really important in understanding why she was so evasive or would troll publications is imagine how frustrating it would be to be like stunningly beautiful, well done makeup, impeccable clothes, beautiful jewelry, beautiful home, beautiful creative work. And then someone goes, "Can you tell me about your wheelchair?"
The family wasn't wealthy, but they managed. With Virginia's art sales and also the money she made from designing and sewing dresses, they got by. Then, in 1957, Virginia's father died suddenly of a heart attack. This left the family in dire straits. By this time, there were social welfare programs to help the family, and through the sale of the family home, her mother was able to relocate them to Missouri to be close to Virginia's brother Eugene and his family. This proximity allowed for help with Virginia's care.
She had two brothers, but one kind of went off to become like a trumpet player and whatever. And then the other, Eugene, chose a more stable life. And he worked some kind of corporate. But so he'd get moved around. And after the death of Virginia's father, the idea was sell the family house and then go buy like a smaller house by Eugene so that there's other care there's the family network is there. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is the clearest thing about Virginia's family is that they were very close and that they like she didn't seem like a miserable person. There's so many descriptions in the book of her niece, nephews, cousins that just talk about going to their house at holidays, and she would have made all of these handmade decorations for the tree, and she like made cookies and would sit them on her lap and like draw with them. And like this seemed like a family that was very happy and proud of her, and that she was happy, and that was from kind of this close-knit family. Now, the downside is, so first they went to Missouri, and then eventually Eugene was sent to like Arizona. And so, the family had been fully ensconced in Portsmouth. So there were friends and other extended kind of social networks and all those shops that had been selling Virginia's paintings and the local customers that would hire her to sew their prom dress or whatnot, And so as they start moving with Eugene, it's like the family stays close, but Virginia does kind of lose the more public social life that she had. At this time in Missouri and Arizona, like it's like the train systems, the bus systems, like it just wasn't as conducive to getting around as it was in Portsmouth.
And in Portsmouth, she'd already established her art. Like her art had preceded her socially. So her art was out there doing that work and establishing her identity when she couldn't be. And when you shift to a new place and you can't pick up and take that community notoriety, especially before the internet.
So as they're in Missouri and then they end up in Arizona, it's like this increasing kind of isolation where now social life is kind of just family. Her mom's not going out and like peddling her wares at shops to get them to sell her artwork. It's so that kind of goes out the window. But, and this becomes testament to the other thing that Virginia doesn't get a lot of credit for, she was a great businesswoman. Virginia, not her mother, was the person in charge of her finances and all the things. Her mom had nothing to do with that. So even as Virginia became a multimillionaire, Virginia handled all of that. Like, she was on her job. And the first inkling of this is that while she had been making money selling paintings, she had been investing some of that money into the stock market and did well. So they moved to Missouri. She's not able to paint anymore. I mean, she can paint, but she's not able to sell her paintings anymore. But she tells the family that now playing the stock market with what she'd invested, she was actually earning more of an income. And so it would have been income from the sale of the house. And then because of the Depression, all of the social welfare programs that were put in place by FDR would have allowed then for there to be like an income, a stipend, right, for their care. And then there would have been like Virginia's earnings from art and the stock market. So this was a scrappy family that was like pulling it together. But this time she's like, okay, I'm not going to focus on art anymore. I think I'm finally going to start focusing on writing. And so she would have been about 35 at this time. She picked up a copy of something called the Writer's Handbook, which, if you don't know, is an old school kind of like, here's how to write a story.
I've never heard of it.
Here's how to write a poem. Here's how to write a this. Here's how to write a that. Like an instructional, like, you know, an educational manual on like how to do the craft of writing. So she picks it up and gets to work.
She did not write Flowers in the Attic right away. She spent the next 20 years honing her craft of writing and doing arts and crafts to entertain herself and her nieces and nephews. She wrote 9 unsuccessful novels and 20 short stories during this time. Family described her relationship with her mother as hot and cold, and something they couldn't make sense of. Virginia and Lillian followed Virginia's brother Eugene from state to state as he was transferred by his job, and the lack of permanence in a home put a strain on Virginia and her mother.
So it wasn't clear in the book what was meant by unsuccessful novels, but I'm assuming that what he means is she completed 9 novels, probably tried to write to literary agents to get them published, and was rejected, essentially. I'm kind of taking it to, like, not like she wrote them and threw them in a drawer, but like she wrote them, sent out a query letter, and people were like, no, thank you.
On to the next.
But she persisted.
That's really impressive. 9 novels, 9 disappointments is a lot to continue to work through. And that in itself is really admirable to me.
So finally, Lillian decides she wants to move back to Portsmouth. Like, she's just tired of kind of the isolation and everything else. So in preparation for that, they end up moving to Atlanta, Georgia, where Virginia's cousin Pat is. Now, Pat was 17 years younger, but like Pat is now married with children, has a nice house. And the way the house was structured was like, it was a split level. And so it was like really ideal for Virginia. It was like, it was easy to carry her around. And her cousin Pat says like, she was so tiny. She's like, I could like carry her on my hip and like carry her around. Like Virginia was like, she was a very petite person. So like, and so Pat described this as kind of like, it was a very ideal time. Like, it was really fun. She was super excited to have her cousin in the house, and she really idolized her and all the things. And so she was like super excited, and they got really close. And that ended up becoming like a problem because it started to interfere with how Lillian felt that Virginia would be best cared for. Because as we're going to see, Pat had a very different approach to meeting Virginia's needs, or maybe had a very different idea of what
that looked like.
What of Virginia's, or just which of Virginia's needs needed to be prioritized. There was kind of a difference in opinion over kind of what was more important for Virginia's
And what did Virginia think?
And well-being.
Like, what was Virginia thinking about what she needed while people were discussing it for her? Which I feel like Pat probably listened to her, and Pat's probably advocating for her based on her actual desires. From what we've discussed so far, it seems like Pat really just like wants her to have autonomy and agency that her mom just never, at this point, it seems like her mom still sees her as that 17-year-old who was just diagnosed. From The Woman Beyond the Attic, quote, amid Lillian's screaming and carrying on one time, we left for the Marriott Hotel in Atlanta. We headed right for the bar and lounge, ordered dinner and a drink, watched the dancing, and loved the music. Dinner was not over until Bananas Foster's was ordered and set afire at our table. The poor girl hungered for fun and excitement. No one appeared to notice her affliction or her wheelchair. I took her, chair and all, to an epic religious film in Atlanta, too. Movies were not off limits for us, popcorn and all. Hell yeah.
She goes on, one day, I told her to dress for shopping at the mall. We went to Atlanta, to Phipps Plaza, Saks on one end and Lord & Taylor on the other. Carpeted. We went despite Lillian's objections. We got into the car and started laughing. Virginia told me she had never been in a shoe store since she was 16. She must have tried on a million pairs. We went into a wig store and she bought a wig. Before becoming wheelchair bound, she'd had a voluptuous head of hair, but it was thinning. Quote, she loved the mall and getting out of the house as much as her mother hated us doing it. I think she was ashamed of my beautiful and perfect Virginia. I was always proud to be pushing her wheelchair. I was proud of her before she was famous. I never saw her after she became so, unquote.
That's so sad. That's such a cool, such a cool experience, such a cool cutscene, to this great night out. Mm-hmm. It's very disappointing. Soon enough, the tension was too much. One night, Virginia asked Pat to come to her room at bedtime to talk. Virginia was in her 50s. Lillian burst into the room, telling Pat to leave Virginia alone and let her rest. Virginia said that it was fine, but Lillian wouldn't have it and lunged at Pat, pushing her against a wall. Pat told Lillian she had to move out and that she would take care of Virginia. The next day, Virginia's brother Eugene came and picked Lillian and Virginia up and took them to Portsmouth, Virginia, where she bought a house. It was 1977.
So in this story, Pat was like, I felt like she wanted to talk to me about Flowers in the Attic, like she was starting to write it. And like, that's what she wanted to talk about, but that they were like interrupted. And so she said that after this incident and, obviously Pat was talking out of her ass and was like, I'm going to take care of Virginia. Da, 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 da. And, that was probably a fantasy on Pat's part because she was also like a mother with like kids and
she didn't know, she couldn't possibly know what the actual care was like.
Yeah. Like she probably had a fantasy of what caring for Virginia was like. And I get that. And I have sympathy for Lillian and kind of recognizing that. Like, this is all fun and games for you, but like, you have to understand that like, this is a person that has needs and they need to be addressed like 24/7. They can't just be fun for 6 hours. Like, this is a full-time job. It reminds me of like in a divorce, like one parent trying to be the fun parent. And so kids like really love the fun parent while the actual reliable parent who's providing and maintaining like their actual well-being is vilified because they're just not fun. But not to diminish Pat. And so like, I get that, like I get that. It's just like a hard situation. In 1977, Virginia's 54. They've just moved to Portsmouth. And this is when she recalls the story of the young doctor from 40 years ago that told her how him and his siblings had been hidden away in a mansion for 6 years to preserve the family wealth. And she puts pen to paper. And according to her, she like writes out a draft in one night by hand. And then the next day types it up a year later. So I'm assuming after it's gone through all the drafts and edits, right? A year later, she sends a pitch letter to a literary agent named Anita Diamant, which described the novel Flowers in the Attic. And this is how it is described by Virginia in the pitch letter. Quote, real children who struggled to survive under almost unendurable circumstances. Basically, a horror story, unquote.
But the plot for Flowers in the Attic that Virginia described in her letter to Anita Diamant remained basically the plot of the final rewrite and the published manuscript. Quote, plot. A young wife is suddenly widowed, left with 4 children. She's totally unskilled for the labor market and deeply in debt. Her home and all she has are repossessed. However, she has one choice. She is the sole heir to a tremendous fortune. If she can deceive her dying father and never let him know she is the mother of 4 children whom he would despise. Quote, 4 children are imprisoned in an upstairs room of a huge mansion. Their playground is the attic. The 2 older children are 12 and 10, named Christopher and Kathy. The younger 2 are twins, age 3, when they go to live upstairs.
So the pitch goes on. Without sunlight, Corey and Carrie cannot grow. Their lives become a virtual endurance test to outlive the dying grandfather, who stays always on the first floor, taken care of by a private duty nurse and a staff of servants. The years pass. The grandfather doesn't die. The mother marries again and gradually drifts away from her children. Unquote. In her letter, Virginia emphasizes that the children's grandmother considers them, quote, the devil's issue, born out of unholy wedlock between half-niece and half-uncle, unquote. She emphasizes the truth of her story by ending the letter, quote, I call my novel, which is not truly fiction, Flowers in the Attic.
That's a hell of a pitch, I'll say.
Yeah, it's crazy to see the pitch of something that would go on to be such like a Goliath when it comes out. And that is all the time we have this week. So next week, we are going to talk about Flowers in the Attic and how it became a cultural phenomenon and why it became a cultural phenomenon and how it became probably to this day one of the most successful debut novels ever published. It was a really big deal. And the franchise still exists to this day, 40 years after her passing. So
she's the Tupac of the literary world.
She really is. Honestly and truly, she is. It's really fascinating. And so I hope you guys will be back next week because this is probably my favorite episode
I'll be here. With bells on, baby. Yay, we did it.
All right. Now for some housekeeping. If you would like to support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/illrepute. And we have one tier, treat it like a tip jar. We occasionally post bonus content in there. We just recently posted a 2-hour episode about Mommy Dearest, and we watched it and we reacted to it and we talked all about
Apparently I cried. I forgot that I cried when we were watching it. I didn't mean to. Yeah. If anybody feels bad, don't feel bad. I'm a weepy bitch. Really, just a false wind could set me off. So
yes. You have bones like a bird, hollow.
Victorian is...
You just fly away with the breeze. Yes. Limp-wristed, pale, blonde, with liquid blue eyes.
Darling, go on.
So, yeah, you can join the Patreon. You get some bonus content. We post our scripts up there. Interact. I'm gonna start doing, a weekly blog there too, where I can just vent to you guys about my favorite TikToks of the week, my favorite songs of the week, my favorite TV shows, my top 10 listicles about different awesome women, whatever is kind of going on.
Can I just go and like my feelings to our patrons? All right, hey y'all, hold on to your butts.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to do it like every Sunday. Do like a nice little just keep you in the loop of like the culture I'm consuming and the things I'm thinking about. And that can be a great place for you to drop a line about women you love that you would love to see, profiled. And we will take that into due consideration. But yeah, come on in, y'all. Come on in. Take a seat, leave a comment, leave a like. If you're not in the position to be on Patreon is free to join, by the way. So even if you just want to join just to be kept abreast of things, it's free to join. And then we have our $5 tier where you get all your bonus content and stuff. Second way you can help the pod is, rate, review on whatever platform you're on. That stuff
talk about us.
Helps.
Talk about us on Twitter. Talk about us on Reddit. Talk about us on TikTok. tell your friends, tell your siblings, tell smart people, tell hot people, tell dumb people if you think that they'll enjoy it. Send them a YouTube link, because at least we're pretty, so they'll maybe like that.
And we're kind of working on a new format for the YouTube content, so that is really exciting. We're going to see what that looks like as we continue to grow. As mighty, scrappy content creators, we're constantly trying to course correct and make it better and better and more enjoyable for y'all.
Absolutely. And your hosts today have been me, Ella Darling, and Sovereign Sire. The script was researched and written by Sovereign Sire, and we are gratefully produced and edited by one Mr. Joshua Anderson, who we have so much love and appreciation for. Thank you, Josh.
Yes, that's our boo.
Love you, Joshy.
That's our boo. All right, we did it.